All right, so today we have Kian Katanforoosh, CEO and founder of Workera, which you can find at workera.ai. Tagline is Verified Skills Intelligence. So, Kian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So, I guess let's start at the beginning. For our listeners who are not familiar with this domain and space, so it looks like on your website you have a catalog of skills and a way of verifying skills. So, can you give us a sense of how big this market is for skills verification?
Yeah. Well, it's a newer market that is extremely large. I would say that anything that touches skills data today is on the rise. Oftentimes, people, when they think about skills assessments or measurements, they think about I've taken the SAT or I've taken the TOEFL exam or I've taken the GMAT when I'm applying for my MBAs. Companies that build those exams are very large. And when you extrapolate that, let's say, concept of university admission to someone's career or an employee at work, you realize that there is countless point in time where they need to validate their skills or to demonstrate a certain competency, whether it is before getting a job, where they need to qualify, after getting onboarded and they need to be matched to a project, when a manager wants to mentor them and orient them in their career, when they need to choose where to spend their time learning or what book they should read or what podcast they should listen to. Measurements come very handy in those situations. And so because of all these touch points, the market for accurate skills verification is extremely large.
Yeah. So, roughly, Kian, what's the breakdown between B2C and B2B?
From a Workera standpoint, it is exclusively B2B and federal. However, there are assessments that are also focused on the B2C. Workera has free assessments for consumers so that they can go and test their skills in artificial intelligence, in cybersecurity, in software engineering, etc. But the business model is exclusively enterprise and federal.
But there are people who are signing up. I guess one can imagine something like Duolingo as like a skills assessment, right? So,
absolutely, Duolingo offers an English test that is growingly popular, and that's considered a skills assessment as well.
Yeah, and so obviously this is an AI podcast, and we will discuss the role of AI in skills assessment and skills identification. But rewind, let's say 5 years ago, obviously there were tech companies in this space. Maybe they were using some form of AI. So, what were the prior solutions before the rise of, let's say, generative AI?
In skills specifically?
Yes, yeah, in skills assessment. So, what were people doing before? I'm sure they were using some form of technology, right?
Yeah, I would say that historically, assessments have been used for summative purposes. Summative means pass-fail, high-stake purposes. So you're a candidate, you want to get a job, you get an assessment, and you don't get a ton of feedback. It's not meant for learning or personal development. It is meant to admit you to that job or to reject you from that job. The same happened in university admission. So until maybe Workera, most assessments were exclusively built for high-stake pass-fail assessments. And what we provided to the market and sort of reinvented is the use of assessments, not only from a pass-fail perspective, but most importantly, for people to know where they stand, compare themselves to the market, to benchmarks, be able to make the right decisions in their career, or simply to decide what to study next. And that takes a lot of different technology, because you can see how you're flipping, putting the importance on maybe the company trying to hire, to actually putting the importance of what value you're going to provide to the person from a self-awareness standpoint, from a time-saving standpoint, from identifying the right projects for them or the right jobs for them or the right courses and classes for them. The purpose is different and the technology is different as well.
And let's see. So obviously generative AI became much more prominent in November 2022 with the rise of ChatGPT. So what changed in the area in the assessment space?
Many things. To create. I would say a few things first to motivate the need for assessment, but what changed is that skills change much faster than ever. Now with everybody needing AI skills, people talk about prompt engineering. You need to update your skills much more frequently. And there is a metric that the World Economic Forum shares on a regular basis called the half-life of skills. And it is reported that the half-life of skills used to be over 10 years. You didn't need to update your skills for a decade. Today, the half-life of skill is estimated around 4 years, for digital areas around 2.5 years, which tells you that with the rise of these technologies, people in every job need to update their skills much faster. And so AI has influenced, to a certain extent, the human resources and education market because of the half-life of skill going down. On top of that, writing a quiz is very easy. Anybody can write a quiz. Writing a really good assessment is extremely hard. Validity is a concept of showing that what you intended to measure is in fact what you're measuring. And it is extremely hard, impossible to prove 100% validity. But AI can help in a variety of steps in the workflow of assessments. First, before you develop the assessments, AI can help with modeling the competencies you want to measure. Before I decide how to measure, I want to decide what to measure and making sure that this is relevant to the employee's role or this employee's future role. On top of the competency modeling, you need to create the assessment, which comes after. And AI can help streamline not only the creation of an original assessment, but also the conversion of that assessment to different languages, to different scenarios, to different contexts that are industry specific, geography specific, etc., etc. So that's before the assessment, if you will. During the assessment, when you start testing the assessment, AI can help you with synthetic users, for example. You can send synthetic users through the assessment and actually collect feedback from those synthetic users, sometimes called LLM as judges. And that can help streamline the calibration process of an assessment. And then you have all the things that people do post-assessments, monitoring the fact that certain questions are going to show up to be bad. Just people find them too hard, or people find them too obvious, or one of the options in a multiple choice gives away the answer to another one. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and the ability to monitor an alert with AI is drastically superior to the old way, let's say, where humans had to run models and collect and update. Now you can do that much better with a monitoring system with AI, and maybe even you can have an agent that updates the assessments with a human in the loop, which is much faster. So countless places for innovation of AI in skills assessment.
Now, actually, as you were talking there, I was thinking about the start of the pipeline, right? So let's take programming and coding, right? So 5 years ago, there were already tools that people were using for filtering people out, coding tests, right? So coding skills assessment. But now I don't know, Kian, the nature of coding and programming has changed, right? So if, I would imagine if you're telling me that I'm going to take your coding test and I'm not allowed to use a coding assistant, well, wait a minute. When I do the job, I am going to use a coding assistant, right? So, in other words, when I'm doing programming, I am using 3 or 4 different coding assistants to help me. So, why should I not be able to use that when I'm doing the assessment?
No, I think you should be able to use it. I think the assessment has to change. If you look at a lot of the previous generation coding assessments, they focused overly on syntax. But do you care anymore if you forgot a comma or a column at the end of your sentence? Probably not, because not only you would be able to debug, but also you will already have used an assistant to code, and it would not make the syntactic mistake that you're making. So instead, the assessment should focus on other cognitive levels, let's say, such as analyzing information, synthesizing information, creating new information, rather than purely syntactic details. And so this is an important trend. Yeah, I agree.
So because of the rise of these frontier models, in many ways it's become easier to build and build and develop an impressive prototype, right? So the joke in the space now is it takes me a week to build an impressive prototype, but now it'll take me 5 weeks to evaluate whether or not it's good enough to deploy. So I bring that up in the sense that your whole business is evaluation in some ways, right? So assessment is evaluation. So now you have to make sure that your AI evaluator is good enough to deploy. So the bar is much higher for you in some ways.
Oh, absolutely. It as I said, you can go to ChatGPT, you can say generate a quiz, but it's not gonna cut it for an enterprise application. But I have an interesting data point around the same concept that you said. So we have a study at Workera that was calculating the number of skills that are needed to prototype AI versus to deploy AI. And so it sounds like what came up is that you need about 1,000 skills to prototype AI, between the modeling skills and some of the prompt engineering skills and some of the responsible AI skills that you need. And by skill, I mean something very granular. I don't mean like AI is a skill or a responsible AI is a skill. Those are branched out into subdomains, into topics, into subtopics. And maybe one skill is write a prompt or write a prompt chain or write a chain of thought. Those are tasks or skills, call it. And so when you get to production AI, you have about 10,000 skills needed, because you need to add all the different components between the serving and the monitoring and the data engineering and the testing and the fuzzy engineering. All of that needs to come together, and it's really complicated. I remember in 2019 there was this interesting paper from Google called "Hidden Technical Depth in Machine Learning," and you probably talked about it in a previous podcast. But the figure that everybody remembers from that paper is that figure where machine learning code is a tiny little piece of the entire ecosystem of AI engineering systems that you need to put together for a product to be deployable. And I think this is even more true than before. Yeah.
So in your case, right? So if I come to you and I say I want you to do skills assessment on a workflow that you may not be familiar with, right? So I'm just going to throw out an example here, like let's say full stack web development, right? So which might start with some kind of this wireframe on Figma, and then you're gonna at some point you'll have to do some Node.js and GraphQL, right? So all the way to production. So what's your process for onboarding that and chopping it up into really granular skills?
Yeah. So we have call it one agent that is responsible for competency modeling. It can be conditioned on a variety of things. So, you would have a subject matter expert either share a job description, or maybe share a task analysis, or maybe share what the enterprises would call their job architecture, their job family, their job levels. And so full stack engineer level 2 in a certain geography on a certain industry is maybe one part of the matrix. We take that information and it allows us to granularize the tasks or skills that are worth measuring. At that point, there is a human in the loop. So the subject matter expert would come and say, do I agree that these are actually the competencies today that I want to measure? And so there's a little workflow where the person validates or removes or makes it more precise, and then validates, and then you're going to measure after that. But that competency modeling requires a high degree of subject matter expertise and validation to make sure what you're measuring is what you wanted to measure. Yeah.
So in your case, the tools that you bring to the table, if if I ask you to do something like this for something completely different, like, I don't know, process engineering for electric vehicle battery manufacturing, right? Uh, what's the role? Where does AI help? So I'm like you said, there's a subject matter expert that will check the results, but what does the AI need in order to flourish? And what would you like to see from people using your tool that they kind of have bring to the table, so to speak, to kick off the process?
Yeah, I'll answer that question and then I'll provide more context on how we do it actually. But let's say battery engineer. Well, language models have been trained on pretty much every data you find online, copyright free, call it, and license free. But battery engineering content exists out there. So if actually you ask AI to figure out what are important skills in battery engineering, you would get a pretty good answer. And then the subject matter expert will come and take that quality from 80% to 100%, hopefully, or 90%, in a place where it's good enough to start deciding what to measure and go to the next stage. So that's good enough. Now, there are issues with that process, which is on the Workera catalog, we would separate the core catalog of skills that are measurable on the Workera platform off the shelf from the custom catalog, which customers can take and create custom assessments, the way we just described. The advantage of using a standardized catalog is that you get benchmarks. When you measure yourself in a responsible AI on Workera, well, you can see how you compare to others and other industries and other geographies, because those assessments are comparing apples to apples. And so in certain cases, you want to have that data, you want to compare yourself to, you want to gauge how far you are from best in class technology teams. And then you don't want to generate a custom assessment. You want to take one of those standardized assessments. On the other hand, if you take a custom assessment, you will benefit from high relevancy. It's supposed to be highly relevant to your job, even if you get less data as an output. Yeah.
Obviously anonymized, right? So if I'm Goldman Sachs, I don't want to see the assessments of. I don't want J.P. Morgan to see my assessments, right?
That's right. It's industry anonymized, and you can see at the industry level. And there's a lot of way to slice and dice that data so that it's helpful, but also anonymized. Yeah.
By the way, Kian, some domains bring actual tools to the table, right? So the classic example here that most of the frontier model builders are actually interested in is math, right? So gauging the reasoning ability of their frontier models against, I don't know, the Math Olympiad or some other thing. But in math has automatic theorem provers and theorem verification tools, right? So it actually brings something to the table. So are there other domains like that where they actually have tools that you can leverage?
You mean tools that you can
Yeah,
leverage to
because
determine if.
in math, what they normally do is what right now the stage of AI in math is basically the AI will help you translate. It's almost like used as a programming tool, right? So translate words into like a language that you can feed into a theorem prover, right?
Yeah, logical steps. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So are
Yeah,
there
yeah.
are
Well,
there other domains that bring their own tools to the table that you can leverage? I mean, they have their own sort of assessment tools or tests and things like that.
well, I would say you can think of domains that are closed form and domains that are open ended, where in assessment we have this pyramid that we call Bloom's taxonomy. The pyramid represents the cognitive levels that we use at work on a daily life. So the first levels are knowledge level, where I will ask you what's the capital of France, and you would say Paris, and that's the bottom of the pyramid. And then you go one level above, and I can ask you, let's say, take this data matrix and extract the principal components, and that's a very applied level. And then I can go one level above and say, here's an open-ended problem with a data set. Verify if this hypothesis is true, which requires a lot more cognition, including math and reasoning capabilities. Well, each of these levels need to be measured differently. Some of them are going to be closed form, where the grading is super easy. You can test and repeat. Some of them will be hard. They will be open-ended, and you will need a lot of technology to verify that the answer is robust, to send it back to update the scoring and calculate it across maybe 10, 20, 100 users before it is even calibrated. And so we will have to, do it differently depending on the cognitive level that we're measuring.
So right now, if you were to break down usage in Coursera, what percentage would be at the job application stage? What percentage would be at the actual? I'm in my job. I want to upskill, and so I don't know what other how you categorize usage.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the majority of people right now are measuring to upskill. They are measuring to acquire skills like AI skills, data skills, soft skills that are growingly important in an age where you have agent and you're dealing with agents. So that's one. The second application is probably project resourcing. Managers have 1,000 people in their team and they have no idea who's good at what. And having an assessment that runs on a regular basis allows the company or the organization to know, where are my experts? What level are they? And if I have a project that comes up, I know who to go to determine the right team and to find the right fit for that project. So this is the second one, probably. And then you have a lot of internal mobility right now. I mean, companies are not hiring a lot. So what they're doing is they're looking internally at how can we maximize the current workforce and upskill them and match them to the right projects and plan our workforce ahead, which also requires a lot of assessment. So, that's also a really, really big use case.
By the way, in the past, the way people would find the right people internally to compose their teams is to use some sort of knowledge base and knowledge graph, right? So it's like basically they have some kind of knowledge. They do a search and you go, "Hey, Kian has worked on a full stack web project before, so let's get Kian," right? So, but now it seems like you can much more targeted, much more accurately determine, yeah, Kian worked on that project, but Kian is junior, right?
Yeah. There is actually, that's a great point, because there's a large category in HR called talent intelligence. And that concept, a lot of large companies have that capability, is they look at the data inside the company, which is resumes and LinkedIn profiles, and then they try to find matches internally for project. And so they say, hey, Ben said he knows Python on LinkedIn, and there is a Python project here. Let me match Ben to that Python project. What happens in practice is that everybody has Python on their profile. It's like, but there is actually 2,000 engineers that have Python on their profile. And so that's where assessments become important, because assessment is not about just saying someone has this on their profile or someone took a class on that. I created a class with Andrew Ng, which had over 3 million completers, I think, millions of completers. And how can I differentiate the levels between these people? I know that some of them have done it extremely seriously, and I know some of them just clicked through and went ahead. So assessments come in to determine, where's the benchmark, where is this person specifically, does that meet the requirements of the project, and then make the match more meaningful, essentially.
And in the past, there's an even worse case scenario, Kian, which is basically this, right? So let's imagine I'm a big company that consults for other companies. I don't know. I'm just throwing out a name out there, like Accenture, right? So then what Accenture will do is they'll send 10 people over to the company and say, hey, here's the 10 people who will work on your project. And then the company will do some sort of assessment and reject all but one of them. So now with Workera, you can filter the 10 that you send over, right?
So absolutely. Fortunately, Accenture is a client of Workera, and Accenture consultants will probably already have their Workera profile, and they've been matched on this basis with the client. And they've also shown that the benchmark is met, meaning their consultants are above the average level of the client. So the client has assessed, Accenture has assessed, and they can compare apples to apples to see where is the level of the consultant. So yeah, you're completely right.
So what is missing from your perspective? If you had a magic wand, what would you like to request from the frontier model builders?
That's a very good question. I feel that one pain point is observability. We're using language models everywhere in our product, but the ability to observe it effectively is not there yet. And it's not a foundation model thing, it's a tooling thing. You need a better tools for LLM observability. And I'm not talking about software observability, there's plenty of tools there, but that's very different. You want to run an agent that has a complete conversation, you want to trace it back, you want to update it. All of that I'm interested in. The second big problem maybe for me would be repeatability, making sure that for the same calls we can get the same results, because that's not always the case, and not every foundation model provider has that capability yet. And so that's another big one, because we want to have an assessment that can be trusted and repeatable and so on. It's actually
set temperature to zero.
Yeah, you can set temperature to zero, but finding the right balance. For example, one of the things we do is we tailor the assessment based on someone's HR data. So if you are Ben in the sales team in the UK, you will get a sales assessment that is different from the salesperson in the US working on a different industry. That's tailoring. And if you can't set the temperature to zero, because otherwise there's no tailoring, but you want to set it high enough so that the person gets enough value without messing up the quality of the assessment. Obviously, you don't want to lose the quality of the questions, all of that. So all of that are interesting problems that we're also working on.
So is there a limitation in the nature of the models themselves, which are large language models, text-based, right? So what if we had visual language models that were great, or multimodal models? What would more modalities open up for you?
Well, today in the assessment, we have already multiple modalities. If you remove video is probably the only. We have text, we have audio.
That's big. Right? Video is big.
Video is big, yeah. Video is big. Video we have tried, but it's just not good enough. It's not there yet.
What would you like to see what would the video model be able to do that's not there?
Well, for example, we have a popular assessment called Effective Communication Essentials, or Resilience and Adaptability, which are good ones in terms of making them situational. You want those assessments to be situational. Here, you're pitching an idea to your CFO to secure $100,000. You have to be convincing. Well, today you're doing it through a text modality or an audio modality, but you can see how adding a video layer could make it much more immersive. Like the person actually feels like they're in a room and they're talking to someone, and they have to make up something that is convincing, and they have to meet certain criteria. I think it would just enhance the user experience overall to have that capability. Yeah.
Interesting. So do you have assessments that are there assessments that require the person to interact with a graphical user interface? So I don't know, where, a tool that requires a graphical user interface, in which case you would need the model to be able to understand what the person is doing in the GUI and the static system.
You're right. So today on Workera, you have whiteboards, but it is not as advanced as what you're saying. Today it's at level 1, which is the whiteboard is pre-filled like a starter code, and the person is going to work on the whiteboard and submit, and we will grade the whiteboard, which is already complex, But the next step is you want real-time feedback, and maybe the ability of the assessment agent called Sage to draw on the whiteboard alongside the user. Absolutely.
So let's close by looking ahead. So we've spent this whole time talking about skills and skills assessment. I noticed in your website you've mentioned something called another area altogether called mentorship. Mm-hmm. Is that where you want this thing to go, or maybe you have a much more different future vision?
Yeah, mentorship is a big one. When I started Workera, I was teaching the deep learning class at Stanford, and a lot of students were saying we want more mentorship, and that's what the Stanford faculty is amazing at, mentoring students. But when you looked at mentorship as a system, it to me it came out that it's actually 3 subsystems. To be a really good mentor, if you take some of the best professors in the world, they are able to assess the students. They're able to assess them. That's the first step. If they can't assess, they're not going to be a good mentor. The second step is the mentor is able to set goals for the person to help them dream bigger. Oftentimes you say, when I was 15, I met someone who told me this and it opened my eyes and it allowed me to shoot higher. That's a mentor subsystem. So the second one is goal setting. And the third one is connecting the dot. It's the guidance portion. So when people hear mentorship, they only think guidance. But actually, the bigger problems are not guidance anymore. The bigger problems are assessments and goal setting. And then the guidance comes easier when you have a really good assessment and a really goal setting. So what Workera has been working on is making an amazing assessment that can measure any skill, starting with AI and trending skills, making a goal setting framework for people to set their targets and beat the market if they need to, and then guide them through it by working with partners that provide training and help them grow in the middle. So absolutely, that's a big part of what we're doing.
So that middle thing, the goal setting, seems to me in the real world requires a lot of human interaction, right? So I take you out to lunch. I take you out to lunch, and maybe I don't have the right goals for you with one lunch. Maybe I'll take a few conversations before I really get a sense for who you are, right?
Absolutely. And on top of that, most goal setting are qualitative today. But the reason is we don't have data. But today on Workera, you can set a goal of getting 270 points in the machine learning standardized assessments, and you would know what it means. You would know if it's better than the average tech data scientist, or if it's above. If it's above or below. So you can start thinking about goals being more quantitative in that world as well.
And with that, thank you, Kian.
Thank you, Ben.